Okay, so we're back again. All right, so tonight Chris asked me to talk about trying to move from hobby small flocks into economic units. You can call me Dr. Dan. I told my students they could call me Dr. Asshole, but they couldn't call me Dan or Morrical, but I'm not near as formal anymore because most of you are the same age as me. So I work Premier One Supplies, been there for about to be 4 years in January. I was the extension specialist at Iowa State. Did everybody get my phone number down and my email? I think Lindsay's going to make the slides available, so you'll have those later, so you don't have to write everything down. But you can refer back to that. I grew up in Indiana, so I'm a Hoosier by birth. My education was at Purdue University on my BS degree. In animal science, and way back in 1977. I grew up on a small farm. My dad worked in the factory. I had two uncles that were very heavy into agriculture. One ran fair to finish operation, and the other fed cattle. They had about 1,500 head of cattle on feed back in the 70s. My little brother's 2 years younger than me, and he was the same size as me, and we were pair of working machines, and we were always in demand to ride hay racks, scoop poop, hold pigs for castration, and any other nasty job that somebody needed done, and we did it. After I graduated from Purdue, I went to graduate school at New Mexico State after working a year on a fair to finish operation of my neighbors. My brother took that job after I left, and he lasted 6 months. So you can tell the guy wasn't easy to work for. I got my PhD in ruminant nutrition from New Mexico State University in '84. And my master's was in reproductive physiology. And my actual PhD study was looking at goats as a biological control for creosote bush, which is an invader species in that Chihuahuan desert. It's got a lot of phenolic compounds. When you look at it, it's really, really shiny leafed. The goats ate everything in the paddocks except the creosote bush. So it was a epic failure. We had a little trap in the middle of 4 10-acre paddocks. One day I'm gathering the goats, and I hear a rattle, and I had a rattlesnake in the trap where we were catching the goats, and I almost quit graduate school right then. So I graduated in '84, got hired by Iowa State University and spent 33 years there as their sheep specialist. I oversaw the research farm, did some applied research on sheep, then became the farm coordinator. So I oversaw 9 different livestock farms in our department for about 10 years. The other thing you got to realize about universities now, they have an animal care committee. Federal government wants, if they're getting NIH funds, whatever, you have to have an animal care approval for your research project. And I chaired that committee for 6 years, which was quite interesting. So I retired from Iowa State, moved to New Mexico. We had a family crisis, tragedy. So then I moved back to Iowa. My daughter lives with me. She's a nurse in an emergency room. My son teaches at a community college in their ag program. I have 3 grandkids that show sheep, play all the sports that you can play, and are active in 4-H. And then the other thing, I developed the National Sheep Improvement Program in 1987, which is a genetic improvement model. And then we have software packages, Excel spreadsheets that do ration balancing. One's called Sheep Brands. We have goat brands for any goat people that also have goats. And the goat one also does meat goats as well as dairy goats. And brands stands for beef ration and nutrition decision software, because it was developed, the first ones were developed out of the Beef Center, and then we just modified them to make them work for sheep. So tonight we're going to talk about production goals, we're going to talk about revenue, we're going to talk a little bit about cost containment, and then we're going to talk about labor. Because one of the biggest challenges if you're trying to make money with sheep is running enough to really make big money and not killing yourself. So labor is kind of critical. So that'll be one of the things we'll touch on the end. I don't know who's watching. I'm not good at watching for questions, but if we get questions in the chat box, I don't even see the chat box. So if we get questions, somebody let me know and we'll try to answer them as we go. All right, so we think about production levels. We're going to make money in sheep. We got to have high production. Pure and simple. That's the number one thing that determines whether you make money in the sheep business, is output per ewe. So let's assume lambs born per ewe greater than 200% is where we got to be. And you're all going, I don't want triplets. But for every triplet we get 4 more sets of twins. So we can lose all the triplets and still be lambs ahead. Now, I know we're not going to, but we can. And when the Pipestone group started in Southwest Minnesota at that technical college, they pushed using prolific genetics, the Finn sheep. They had a contest for the first producer to market 200% lamb crop, which is a tremendously difficult task, okay? Because if we want to market 200%, that means we got to wean at least 204, because I assume we have 2% death loss from birth to weaning. Or excuse me, I said that wrong. 2% death loss from weaning to market. So if we want to wean 204, we got to drop 225, because we lose 10% from birth to weaning. And if you don't think you lose 10%, you have really poor records. You're not honest with yourself, or you don't have very many sheep. If you're under 10% death loss from birth to weaning, you are a great management operation. Or you only have all singles. The real challenge becomes if we want to drop lamb 225, our mature ewes are 80% of the flock and the ewe lambs are 20%, give or take. So you got to have mature ewes got to drop 240 because the ewe lambs aren't going to drop 225. And then the ewe lambs have got to do 160. And if your ewe lambs won't do 160, they're never going to get to 230, 240 as mature ewes. Now, I'd just as soon have all the ewe lambs give me twins, because then they're all easy to manage. You can feed them all the same. You don't get big singles by overfeeding some of those ewes that only carry one. And so, in all reality, the easiest is if all the mature ewes have 3 and all the ewe lambs have 2. But the sheep don't listen. Okay, if we look at flock size and profit, income per ewe, across the top got supposed to have, okay, yeah, my screen, my picture's covering it up, but that's okay. I know what those numbers are. If we think we can make $25 a head, and we got 25 ewes, we make $625. But if we've got 300 ewes, and we make $25 a head, we can make $7,500. So a nice little part-time job. If we've got income of $100 per ewe, which the good producers are doing today, or more, even though feed costs are up, they're still making money because the lamb market's way up. They can make $30,000. And you can run 300 ewes as one person pretty well. Now, a lot of the Pipestone guys, they've got production contracts. They're running 600, 700, 800 to 1,000 ewes. They may be using some part-time labor. They do some things with blitz lambing, so they'll lamb 200 ewes in 3 days, take 3 weeks off, lamb 200 ewes in 3 days or a week, and have, so they can handle it. So they don't give up sleep for the whole lambing season, just a few days. So market price. Everybody worries about the price of lambs and the market price, and I need to get the top price for my lambs. You can maybe change the value of the lambs you sell by 1%. So maybe you can get, if they're bringing $250 a pound, you might get an extra 3 or 4 cents. So you might get $2.53. 100-pound lamb, you make $3 more. Big deal. That's not going to make or break us. Now, if you can sell half of your ewe lambs for replacements and get $100 premium on them, then that's making them worth more. I think you should consider getting a production contract. Right now, the sheep industry supply is short, and it must be short all over the world. I don't understand this because the market's really high. Lots of you may be selling into the ethnic market, selling the 70 to 80 pounders. But to me, the challenge with that system is their holidays, their religious activities change around the calendar. So it's hard to put a production system together so you can try to hit that market. I also worry about, at least in the United States, that we got to be getting close to saturating that ethnic market, because we've had so many people go from wool sheep to hair sheep. So I would suggest we need to focus on what we can control, and that's output in terms of lambs born, death loss, what weight they are when we sell them, and feed costs. Because we've got to control that end on the profit equation. Some of you may be doing direct marketing. I think that's great. I am not that good of a people person. I was asked about organic grain at a sheep conference once because their customers wanted organic lamb. And I told the lady, just lie to them. Now, that's not appropriate, obviously. I don't believe in organic production. I think it makes people feel better about what they're buying. But there's no nutritional difference between organic and natural or normally produced sheep. I think if you're going to sell direct, you got to get 2 to 3 times the live price. Okay? It's not easy. Now, everybody can sell lamb chops, but sheep aren't 100% lamb chops. So you gotta work out what you need. I know Cody Hemke works for Nyman Ranch, and he developed a spreadsheet on trying to price cuts on a lamb carcass so you can figure out how much you need to charge for all the pieces so that the total makes you money. I think that's available from the American Lamb Board still, so you can check that webpage and see if you can find that one. Liability insurance. There is no doubt when you sell direct to the consumer where the lamb came from, they get sick, they die, you're liable if they can prove it was the lamb that you sold them that they ate that caused the problem. So I would check with my insurance agent to make sure I'm covered. And the last thing you probably should do is spend some time getting certified on lamb quality assurance and food safety. One, so you can check your locker out, make sure they're doing things right. Because it won't be the locker, it'll be you. Because if you're selling pieces at the farmer's market, they probably won't come back on the locker, they're going to come back on you. Okay, so if we think about making more lambs, getting a higher production, the number one thing we need to do is flush the ewe flock because it increases ovulation rate. This is some data taken use from 2.5 condition score up to 3.5. We'll take the lamb crop from 120 up to almost 185, and this is on some sheep in Britain. Hill sheep, not necessarily really prolific sheep anyway, but you can see having used fatter in better condition gets you more lambs born. Okay, we can overdo it though. I wouldn't feed more than 1.5 pounds of grain because we can get into subclinical acidosis, which may cause some problems with embryo survival. I would probably split that 1.5 pounds on small ewes, especially into 2 feedings a day. And again, now we're back to more labor. You got, Dan, you're making me feed them twice a day. And if we're feeding them in a TMR or using corn silage, then obviously they can't gorge on that grain, which drops the rumen pH, and then we get into acidosis. So we got to be careful about too much. Reproduction is lowly heritable. It's about 10% on lambs born, 10% on lambs weaned, and 15% on pounds weaned. So our management has a bigger impact on drop rate than the genetics we start with. Now, if you start with a Romanov, you'll probably get more lambs born than even if you're a bad manager, because they just have lots and lots and lots of babies. They may not stay in the jug, but they have lots of babies. So management can move our drop rate up 10, 15%. Lambs born per ewe is the first step to increasing our revenue in every operation. We just got to get more born. The United States has about 3 million ewes. Our drop rate is still 1.08. As an industry, now don't tell my US friends I said that, but that sucks. I'm sorry, but it's terrible. In Iowa, we're dropping about 1.5. Normally, it's back and forth between Iowa and Minnesota for the highest drop rate in the United States. I give that all credit to me being a great sheep specialist in the last 40 years and helping people make better choices. When we think about flushing these ewes, we can use alfalfa hay. I've got ewes weighing from 150 to 250 pounds, giving them 2.5 pounds of cracked corn up to 3.5. You'll notice I'm feeding them pretty hard because I'm trying to get them to gain a half a body condition, which is 11% of their body weight. No, 6% of their body weight. 11% is one full body condition score. So these sheep are really gaining weight up. 150-pound ewes gaining almost third pound a day. The big ewes, those would be Suffolks, some Hamps, they're gaining a half pound a day. So it takes a lot of feed to get them to gain that much weight when we're flushing. We can do the same thing with mixed hay or grass hay, but the problem is we got to add soybean meal in, which is really expensive. I use Premier Trace Mineral Salt and AD&E, especially if you're dry lotting these sheep, they need AD&E during breeding and all of gestation. And then we can do it on pasture. We can flush ewes on better pasture. Ewes out on grass, green feed, don't need AD&E. If the grass is green, there's plenty of A. If the grass is green, there's plenty of E. If the grass is green, there's plenty of sunshine, which means there's plenty of vitamin D. If we're going to manage our flock and we're going to run lots of ewes, we need concise breeding groups. I don't ever leave the ram in longer than 35 days. Now, if you can't tolerate open ewes, then you can put him back in later for a second group of lambing ewes. But 35 days is long enough. If he can't get them bred, if the ewes don't get bred 35 days, they probably need to go down the road anyway. Because if you do that for a couple of years and get rid of the open ewes that lamb late, you won't have late lambing ewes anymore. But if you always let them do it, they'll just keep doing it. So on our pasture ewes, we might flush them with corn. Again, half a pound to a pound a day on grass. We don't need as much. Again, I'm not feeding the AD&E. But again, we want them to gain about a half a body condition score during that 2 weeks before breeding up to through the first cycle. What's my caution? I don't remember what my caution is. I can give you an idea. We got to make sure it's good pasture. Seed heads and stems, even though there's feed out there, is not good pasture. We want vegetative growth that's high energy, not too wormy, not too many parasites, so the sheep can actually gain weight. Okay, the mineral status is going to have a tremendous impact on reproduction. Probably you're the same as us in that you need zinc and selenium. We can get minerals from the base ration, and then we can use a mineral or a trace mineral salt to supplement that. And the last statement on this slide is sheep cannot balance their own diets. They have no nutritional wisdom. So put out a mineral, good quality trace mineral. If they're eating too much of it, give them salt as a secondary source of salt, because salt's what drives intake. Okay, we're talking about making money. Here's an example of where you can save money in your sheep operation. This is the only commercial I'm doing all night on my talk. These are two products I developed for Premier. Sheep trace mineral pack on the right that we use with 50 pounds of plain salt. And that makes a trace mineral for your sheep. Costs you about $2.50 to $3 per ewe per year to provide mineral to that flock. Whereas if we use sheep mineral, because it's high in phosphorus, it's more expensive, less salt. Salt's cheap, right? This mix, once you mix it up, 5 pounds of the trace mineral and 50 pounds of salt, it's 95% salt or 90% salt. Salt's cheap, so the mineral's cheap. And then we can add AD&E when we mix it up and feed it. I'd rather do that than buy mineral with AD&E in it, because that tends to get denatured in all that mineral. I had a producer call me a couple years ago. He was in Missouri, which is south of Iowa for those of you in the North Country, and was buying his mineral out of Minnesota, paying $42 a bag for a 50-pound bag, and the ewes were eating 2 ounces per ewe per day. His mineral cost was like $38 a year, and versus $2. I made half of your profit goals for the year making that switch, and he was having problems, so it wasn't that good a mineral. All right, management tips: keep the stud bucks cool. So for those of us in Iowa, we tend to breed for January lambs, so we're breeding in August. You guys may never get hot enough to worry about keeping the rams cool, but you probably need to worry about frostbiting their testicles and causing them damage that way. We always want to breed ewe lambs separate from mature ewes, and here's why. This is work out of Montana. Start of the breeding season, if they bred them with mature ewes, they started at 83 and they ended at 84. So with the adult ewes, those lambs couldn't compete. They weren't getting their fair share of groceries, and they stopped growing and they stopped cycling, and they got 0 conception rate. And these are late maturing fine wool sheep, Rambouillets, Columbias, Polypays. If they bred them in dry lot by themselves, they started at 85. During the breeding season, they put on 14 pounds, so they kept growing, and they got 75% of those ewe lambs bred. So managing the ewe lambs separate, we want them to drop 160% as our target goal. We gotta push them, gotta get them big enough, gotta breed them separate, and we gotta keep them growing through that whole first year of production. They need their own pen, their own feed. Okay, genetics. If we want to get more sheep born, genetics is the quickest, easiest way to go. You guys got Rideaus, right? Quarter fins or maybe 3/8 fins, lots of fin sheep breeding in those sheep, and high prolificacy. In the United States, we developed a Polypay, which is a quarter fin, quarter Dorset, quarter Rambouillet, quarter Targhee. Romanoffs are the most prolific breed of sheep we've got in North America. They'll draw 3.5, lamb crop 3.75, whereas pure fins will do about 2.75. The most overlooked thing we can do to get more output out of our ewes is to have crossbred ewes. Remember, we said heritability on lambs born, pounds weaned, lambs weaned is really low. Low heritable traits respond to crossbreeding. Okay, so maybe you cross a Rideau and a Polypay. These ewes that are on the screen are half Polypay, quarter East Frisian, quarter Romanov. The last year we ran the research flock at that site is in southern Iowa, the ewe lambs. We had 51 lamb, and we had 103 lambs born. Crossbred ewes will give us increased survival on the lambs. It'll increase growth. It'll increase longevity of the ewes. And hybrid vigor is basically free. Now, you got your Rideau ewes, and you're going to say, okay, Dr. Morrical, I'm going to crossbreed them. Don't just go buy any willy-nilly Polypay buck. Buy a good one. Start with good genetics and then cross them, and you get even more hybrid vigor. Don't just buy a ewe settler. Okay, feed costs. Hay feeding waste is the #1 waste in the sheep industry, at least in most flocks, especially if we're feeding hay unprocessed. Tub grind it, feed it in TMR, you'll cut your feed waste, hay waste by 25%. Get better feeders. The Premier walkthrough feeders are really good, but they're not really good unless you set them along a fence line bunk and you can get to them, because carrying hay to feeders is not my idea of a good time. I don't think anybody's got a good big round bale feeder. Silage source. It's already processed, it's nutrient dense, we get the most yield per acre on nutrients. You just got to have enough sheep, enough livestock on your operation to keep it fresh. So we put it in an ag bag, those big white tubes, we got to feed a foot a day or so. So that's a ton. So we got to have a lot of sheep. That's about 400 head minimum.
Dan, if I could just jump in quick.
Sure.
Something I hear a lot is, how many sheep do I need to have before I can get a TMR?
Okay.
And I'm guessing you have a figure for that, as well as how many you need to have that ton of corn silage go out.
300 head.
That's the minimum.
That would be the minimum I would have. Now, if you've got a little cash and you already have fence line bunks, you know, because the real problem is not the TMR wagon. The problem, not the mixer, the problem's the damn tractor. That's where all the cash is tied up. So if you've already got a tractor that's big enough to use, then we're only talking, you know, 3 to 10, 15,000. You don't need to buy a brand new one. There's used ones all the time out there. But I think, Chris, about 300 ewes is about where I'd set that limit at on justifying both a TMR mixer as well as, but there's the small portable mixers. You know, if you're in a confinement, the little TMR mixers that are probably way less, you can probably justify it for 150, 200 ewes. But you got to have a concrete walkway to justify, to run that little feed cart down to get the feed to the ewes. Anything else? Anybody?
Thank you for that.
That's all right. I needed a drink of water anyway. All right. Feed costs are really high right now. We're in a drought in the Midwest. Our corn crop in Iowa is going to be, I'm a sheep guy, not an economist, but I'm guessing we're going to be off 25% easily. Now, they say next week it's supposed to cool off and we're supposed to get rain. The month of June, I think, is our wettest month, and we're down, well, I saw a weather report this morning or yesterday that we're down like 9 inches below normal for the year. So I'll say we have relief in sight when we get 2 or 3 inches. I got 2 inches of rain at my house 16 days ago, and the average temperature has been about 92 cents, and we didn't have any extra in the ground when we got to 2 inches. So Feed's going to be short. First hay crop, first cutting was pretty good, but we won't have much of a second, and probably not. Okay, we're back on. Get a hay probe and test your forage. Know what you're feeding, and then we can balance it with the appropriate supplement. A prime example of people screwing up is they have alfalfa hay and they put out a protein tub. Well, those ewes don't need protein at all. They might need a little energy, but they don't need protein. Using a lick tubs for energy, those molasses tubs, they're about 3 to 4 times more expensive than corn. They're convenience items. They don't pencil into low-cost sheep production. Now, if your sheep are 50 miles away and they need energy, then yes, use a lick tub. Use an energy tub. Because I'm not driving 100 miles every day to feed sheep. All right, here's a great feeder. We sell these for big round bales. I'm guessing we're losing 20% here in all of our wool, or some of our wool. But at least it's being fed in some type of a feeder. You got to feed them in feeders, or else roll out just what they need per day and let them eat it off a frozen ground and move it around. Here's another way to feed them cheaper. This is a forage brassica of some sort. This is at Michigan State University. I think that stuff's 3 feet tall. And so an acre or 2 of that's got a lot of feed, a lot of the, like, turn 1,000 to 2,000 ewe grazing days per acre. So it's cheap feed. Your hay costs, as I looked them up on the web, I think you're in the $160 to $180 a ton range, and we can't buy hay for less than $280 in Iowa because we don't grow hay. We grow corn and soybeans. We buy a lot of hay out of South Dakota and ship it in. Well, diesel's $3 a gallon, so it costs a lot to bring hay in. So forage crops like this, temporary catch crops, are great in terms of yield. They're great because there's no parasites. You can do some lamb finishing on this if you want to. They'll gain 3/10, 4/10 out on that stuff if they're big lambs. If they're just weaned, they probably won't do nearly that well. Okay, so we think about labor. This is also at Michigan State. This is their new confinement sheep barn. They got nice fence line bunks. It's ventilated. It's got heat if they need to, so they don't have to be there all night lambing ewes in the dead of winter. And if I think you're going to run a lot of sheep, I never said this when I was 25, 30 years old. I said sheep were tough enough. You could lamb in cold barns, wasn't any big deal. I've gotten soft. We're pushing the envelope on number born. Little triplets don't do very well when it's 0 when they hit the ground. But if it's 32 degrees, 33 degrees in the barn, they're not going to freeze to death before you check them. But if it's 0, they're a popsicle in 5 minutes, and you got to be there the whole time, and it's not fun lambing ewes in that weather. I think we run 300 ewes pretty well per full-time equivalent. Now, if we set it up with TMR fence line bunks, TMR, we're using corn silage. I had a client way back when I first started, he ran like 500 ewes, and he said it took him 30 minutes a day to feed. He'd start the tractor up, run the silage in from the upright, and feed his ewes. And then he had the rest of the day take care of the sheep. If it takes you all day to feed, you can't manage them because you're busy carrying buckets and bales, and that doesn't work. The Pipestone group has done a labor audit, and we all think that lambing is the big cause of labor. And in reality, it's feeding chores. So figuring out a way to feed them with less labor input is a smart thing to do. So they've went to, in some cases, feeding every other day, maybe every third day. They just give them 3 days worth of feed at once and then feed them twice a week. Now, most of us aren't going to do that, but if we can let them walk to the feed instead of carry the feed to them, that's a great thing. So if we can graze longer, whether that's rotational grazing, whether that's stockpiling, whether that's forage turnips, all of those things help reduce our labor of feeding and our cost potentially. Lambing is our second big labor source. Short breeding seasons, short lambing seasons. The blitz lambing I talked about, the Pipestone group does, they may put 500 ewes in with the rams and pull the rams in 5 days. Then they use ultrasound, the fetal scan, and pregnancy test them in 45 days. So they know whether they took, and they're really tight together so the scanner can call them really well. And then they try to get just the number of ewes that'll go into their heated lambing barn. So that might be 100, that might be 200. And then they'll start another group 2 to 3 weeks later. But they try to really concentrate their labor at lambing to a week at a time. And that's all that's on the agenda. There's no holidays, there's no going out to dinner. It's 24/7. One of the guys that I used to take my sheep class to lives in Spencer, but he's in the Pipestone group. He's up to like 1,700 ewes now. He's got a little bunk bed in his office at the lambing barn, and he doesn't leave. He might sleep for a couple hours, get up and check ewes again, but he doesn't ever leave during that blitz when they're really dropping lambs fast. And those ewes are locked in all the time, except for about 3 hours at the middle of the day when he turns them out to eat. So they don't use corn silage at that time because they can't eat it fast enough. And he wants them back in the barn, locked back up, so he can keep it from freezing. You sell lambs in the neighborhood of 90 to 115 pounds. Okay. We sell lambs from 130 to 180 to 200. I used to tell people sell lambs when they're ready. Now I tell them don't sell them before they're 140 pounds. Because even with high corn prices today, ration costs your lamb feed costs are probably $400 a ton, 20 cents a pound. Lambs convert at 6 to 1. That's $1.20. You're selling them for $3. You're making $1.80 on every pound you put on those sheep, so put as much on them as you possibly can. Now that's not the right thing to do for lean, highly desirable lambs that the consumer really loves, but it is the right thing to do to make money. The other part about that is if you have to get a production contract, potentially, so you know what exactly they want you to bring to them. So I would try to sell at 105 to 110 pounds. I wouldn't sell any 95s. I'd feed them 10 more pounds at least, because you're going to make $10 to $15 a head on every one of those lambs. So when we think about lamb feed costs, one of the things that can kill you is death loss in the feedlot when you're finishing those lambs up. So because all that feed those lambs ate and then die has got to be picked up by the other lambs that you sell. I never sell feeder lambs. I feed them all out. Now, the ethnic market's been really good. Those 75, 80 pounders are bringing $4, I think, when we talked about it before the program started. So probably you should sell those at 80 pounds. But again, I'd sell them at 80. I wouldn't sell them at 71. I'd try to get them on the top end of the weight bracket of whatever they want. All right, to my last slide. And I'm asking for questions, so we'll take questions if we got any. I can't see that part, so somebody else is going to have to do that if we've got any.
I'm just taking a look here. I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. And also, I guess anyone could unmute their microphone.
I'm kind of an unmute guy. Damn it, I lost my question. What kind of infrastructure do you have for feeding those lambs out, Dan? Like, is it that you have empty pen space that you want to feed them out, or do you make space to feed them out?
Some of both. That's what we get into trouble when we go to accelerated lambing. We've got another group coming around and we're running out of space. Because in most cases for us, winter lambing once a year, the ewes can go to, after you get them dried off, the first 10 days after weaning, get them dried off, got to keep them in a good facility then, but then they can go out in dry lot, they can go to the pasture, they can go anywhere. They can go to the solar panels. And then you use the barns to feed out the lambs. Now, if you're lambing all the time and you got 3 or 4 groups of 300 going through and you got lambs coming in, you got to have a lamb feeding barn. You got to have a building designated for your lambs. The pipestone guys, a lot of those guys are weighing lambs every 2 weeks once they get close to market weight. And if a lamb doesn't gain 0.4 of a pound a day in that 2-week time period, they ship him, no matter what he weighs, because they think he's not very efficient and they're getting him on down the road, or her. Other questions? I know that you guys are not nutritionists.
Here's a question. Here's a question from Ursina. Her mic's not working tonight.
Yep.
I'm specifically restricted to shipping 79 pounds or under. Sometimes we adjust the ration to hit the better market window. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So basically, we think the market's going to be better in 3 weeks, so we slow them down, maybe. Or maybe 3 months from now, we think it's going to be better and we slow them way down. I think holding them maybe, or slowing them down for a week or 2 or 3 may be okay. But if you stretch them out 8-10 weeks, you spend a lot of money. That market better be way better. And my opinion is, if you can predict the lamb market, if you know what it's going to be, you just should buy Powerball tickets. Play the lottery. Pick your numbers, win the lottery. I don't have any confidence in telling you what the lamb market's going to be tomorrow, let alone 90 days from now. Now, they say we're short lambs and it's going to be even higher in 90 days. And I talked to a sheep guy today that was offered $3 a pound for 140 pounders, but he didn't have 100 head. Now, what that does to us is when we get the lamb market that high, that means the price in the retail case has to go up. And we can change our demand by getting it too high. Now, I can't figure out why Australia and New Zealand's not in here just dumping and selling lots of imported lamb. Maybe it's all going to China because they are the big player. Whatever China does drives the whole system in every species.
There's another question here from Jennifer.
I didn't answer her question, Chris.
Sorry.
Because there isn't one.
Yes, Ursina says she usually only slows them down for 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I think that has a lot to do with the Quebec system. Jennifer Woodhouse here says, is it possible to finish lambs on pasture economically or justifiably? I would say yes, but you probably have better economics on that one day.
The first thing I say about pasture finishing lambs, okay, we have straight cool season grass, most of our pastures. If you've got great pasture management, it's a really dense sward, you can keep it vegetative, it's got lots of legumes in it, lambs will perform pretty well. You have to obviously keep the coyotes out of them, and you have to keep the worms out of them. So if you can manage parasites, you can manage predators, you can manage pastures, you can make lambs grow on grass. Though we haven't done that in the Midwest or in the United States because corn has been so cheap in the past, you couldn't beat it. Corn's not cheap right now. I don't know whether it'll stay that way, but right now it's not cheap.
Question from Lindsay here was, when you're finishing out your lambs, how do you reduce your mortality? Maybe 4 key points to that.
Okay, so we have heat stress, hot, humid weather, good ventilated barns, lots of air. We have put in big stock fans in the buildings at Premier, and they've got windscreens for sidewalls. They had lots of air movement, but it wasn't enough. We still had a lot of the mycoplasma pneumonia and coughing lambs and prolapses. So we've got it blowing right down on the manure pack, trying to keep that air quality at the ground level much better. Vaccinating for overeating, making sure you've got a good mineral source that has enough iodine, enough selenium, enough zinc, so that and even copper. I don't know whether you guys are copper deficient or copper excess. But if you don't have enough copper, that impacts our immune system, and so we got more disease. Don't change rations real fast. Don't let the self-feeders run out of corn or any other feed, then fill them back up. It's just good and sound management. Walk the pens every day. Find them before they're 3/4 dead. That was a long answer.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Another question I have, I know we've talked about this. So one of the issues here in Ontario is, for some people, slaughter capacity. What would it take to build a new lamb plant as far as animal numbers and kind of the flow and stuff? In your experience?
I have no clue. I have no clue.
But like talking about like San Antonio.
$20 million will get you started, maybe. But I have a guy you can talk to.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
I don't know whether he'll give you any. Spence Rule just built a new lamb plant in Colorado.
Yep. And they're doing what, 1,200 a day?
So he can tell you what it costs. I think you got to kill at least 2,000 lambs a week. Anything else? I think we got another meeting at 8. There some people want to go to, so I'm going to try to get done by 8. And
Some people will. Some people will. There's a question here from Barb Parker. Any comments on ewe longevity targets? How long, I guess, should a ewe stay productive inside the flock?
I hope if they're really producing, I hope to get 5 years out of them. Okay. Now they don't last 5 years on average. They last about 3.5. That's why we got to get 20% every year replacements. That again goes back to weaning management, preventing mastitis, health status of the flock, whether you go OPP free or not. Even if I wasn't going OPP free, I'd be breeding the gene into them for improved resistance to OPP. I'd vaccinate for overeating and not knowing what else you have available to you up there. We don't have any other, well, caseous lymphadenitis maybe.
Yeah, foot rot.
Foot rot, yeah, foot vax. Yes, no?
Yep, I think so.
Okay.
I haven't used it. We've kind of gone a different route. Jennifer Woodhouse asks, what's the best?
Is very effective. I didn't get it.
Sorry, Jennifer Woodhouse asks, what is the best method of feeding mineral in a rotational pasture system without waste? Blocks are useless, correct?
Yes, what blocks are useless.
Yeah, the teeth
So
get knocked out.
you gotta have some kind of a mineral device that keeps the rain out. A mineral feeder that kind of keeps the rain out, okay? The other thing is, I put out a week's supply of mineral. And if it's going to storm tomorrow, I might only put out a day's supply. Okay? You don't have to put out a month's supply of mineral because you're moving them anyway every 3 or 4 days. So put enough out for 3 or 4 days. Read the label on the mineral. It'll tell you how much they're supposed to eat every day. Put it at, weigh it out, measure it out, know what it is, give them that much. And if they attack you when you put it out, then put salt out besides, because that's what they're craving.
What about diatomaceous earth?
It has absolutely no usefulness in the sheep industry. Not to be blunt, but it's not any good. That's why you like me so well, Chris. I sugarcoat everything.
It's true. It's true. One time you said, and this is me, ugly sheep pay bills, pretty sheep don't. Have sheep as ugly as you can stand to look at.
Okay, so, right. Romanoffs are ugly. A half Romanoff ewe will make you lots of money. I used to say back when I first started in Iowa, back in the late 80s, that you had to have as much fin breeding in your sheep flock as you could stand because you had to have high output. But if you can't stand to look at them, you're not going to manage them. Yes, just because they're pretty doesn't mean they're any good. I've got a guy that's raising hair sheep in Arkansas, and he bought this good-looking Dorper buck. And I'll guarantee you, his maternal values, his drop rate of his daughters are going to be pathetic. And I said, you can use him as a terminal sire, but you can't keep any daughters out of him. He might win a purple ribbon with him, but he's not. You don't know anything about his maternal.
No new questions in the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand or even just a reaction depending on their Zoom or has any comments. I know that there's another meeting starting, but by no means are we trying to get rid of Dan. I know some people probably have some more questions or anything.